It happened 3 nights before Christmas. In the little beach bungalow my parents kept standing through every Florida storm. My name is Kayla Park. I am 32, and that house was supposed to be the last safe thing I had left. Our whole family crowded inside for the holiday gathering. Cousins, Aunt Carol, Uncle Martin, everyone still pretending we were close. I had spent 2 days cooking, hanging lights along the porch rail, laying out the good dishes my mother guarded like crystal. Then my older sister, Sabrina Park, turned the night into a performance. She held up a stack of papers and told the room she had already signed the deed. As of today, she was the owner of the house. She said that if anyone had a problem with it, they could consider themselves out of the family. Heat rose behind my eyes, not from shame, but from the way she tried to erase me while smiling like it was kindness. In one move, she tried to take the house. I did not argue. I did not cry. I walked out past the Christmas table, past the blinking lights, and I left the house my parents built. The salt air tasted metallic, like blood in the mouth after you bite down too hard. On that porch, I understood something. Sabrina did not just want the property. She wanted control of the story, and she assumed I would stay quiet the way I always had. That night, I decided she was wrong. If someone in your own family ever tried to take what is yours and rewrite the truth like you were never there, tell me in the comments. Tap like, subscribe, and stay with me, because this is how a quiet sister becomes a problem you cannot move. The room at the roadside inn smelled faintly of bleach and wet carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing the red dress from the party. The zipper cut into my back, but I didn't move. Every sound outside the hum of the vending machine, a car door slamming, felt sharper than it should. My chest hurt from holding everything inside. For years, I had done what people expected. Quiet, practical, dependable. When our parents passed, I stayed to take care of the house while my sister moved to a bigger city and a louder life. I told myself we were still family, that the distance didn't mean disconnection. Tonight had erased that illusion. It wasn't about a deed. It was about being replaced in the one place I had kept alive. The digital clock blinked 12:47. I opened my laptop with hands that didn't feel like mine and searched for the lawyer's number. Julian Cho had handled my parents' estate 5 years earlier. He was precise, professional, the kind of man who never exaggerated. I typed him an email, short and cold, attaching the only photo I had the papers Sabrina waved at the party. I didn't ask if they were real. I asked when he could confirm they weren't. Minutes later, his reply appeared. He wrote that any deed transfer required both sisters' signatures and a notary stamp. No such documents existed in the county record. His exact words, "If your sister claims ownership, it isn't through legal channels." The message steadied me more than any comfort could. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. My shaking eased. The truth wasn't just emotional now. It had structure, weight, evidence. I wasn't crazy, and she wasn't clever. She was desperate. I began to see the pattern clearly: the new car Trevor drove, the stories about investment troubles, the hints of unpaid taxes. Pieces that once seemed random began aligning into a picture too sharp to ignore. My sister hadn't betrayed me out of rivalry. She had done it out of panic. I remembered the years of storms, how my father would hammer boards over the windows while my mother packed candles and blankets. "Keep calm," he'd say. "You can't stop the wind, but you can keep it from getting inside." Those words returned now, not as comfort, but instruction. I opened a fresh document and began listing everything connected to the house: receipts, bank transfers, repair invoices, photos of the roof after the last hurricane. I saved each file twice. The list grew, page after page, a map of every dollar and hour I had poured into that place. Outside, the rain began again. It drummed against the glass, fast and thin. I sat still, watching drops trace the same paths down the window over and over. Somewhere between exhaustion and clarity, I made a decision. I wasn't going to call her. I wasn't going to beg her to undo what she'd done. The silence between us would become a weapon. When I finally turned off the light, the room stayed bright with the reflection of the street sign through the curtains, its blue glow reading vacancy. It felt fitting. She could take the crowd, the applause, the family's approval. I would take the truth, and the truth would be enough to end her performance. If you've ever realized that silence can be stronger than anger, that truth can cut deeper than shouting, tell me below. Morning light filtered through the blinds like thin gold threads. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. There was too much work to do. The world outside seemed indifferent, ordinary, as if last night hadn't torn something essential in half. I opened my inbox again. Julian had sent a certified copy of the original deed. My name and Sabrina's sat side by side, equal owners, both signatures notarized 5 years ago. Beneath it, his message was calm. No amendment has been recorded. The property remains in joint title. It was a sentence that turned air into ground again. Facts had shape. I printed it, slipped it into a folder, and began organizing every document tied to that house. Receipts stacked higher than I remembered: plumbing repairs, roof replacements, hurricane insurance renewals. My handwriting on every line item was proof that I had kept the place alive. Each page was a quiet testimony, more honest than any apology Sabrina could ever give. The list grew heavier until it filled an entire box. I added photographs of the house after the last storm. Blue tarps stretched across the roof, my car parked in the flooded driveway, the note I left for the insurance adjuster. Every image was a fragment of truth. Still, I knew paper alone wouldn't expose the reason behind her desperation. I needed a mirror held to her life, not mine. That's when I thought of Bianca Torres, a college friend turned investigative reporter. She worked for a local news outlet, the kind that cared more about facts than comfort. We hadn't spoken in months, but when I called, she answered before the second ring. Bianca didn't ask for details. She just said, "Send me what you have." Her voice was steady, efficient, the voice of someone used to cutting through lies. I forwarded Julian's confirmation, the photos, the receipts. Within minutes, she replied, promising to check into Hale Developments, Trevor's company. The quiet after the call felt different this time, not empty but loaded. I brewed stale hotel coffee, tasting metal and grit, and stared at the folder spread across the bed. For the first time, I saw the possibility of control returning to my hands. Hours passed. By mid-afternoon, Bianca sent an encrypted file: public records, unpaid loans, pending lawsuits. She wrote only one sentence: "Something's collapsing over there." The words pulsed like static. The truth wasn't just personal anymore, it was structural. Sabrina's arrogance had a foundation built on borrowed time, and now I could see the cracks forming. I spent the rest of the day cataloging everything, building a timeline: repairs I paid for, mortgage statements, tax receipts. I backed it up twice, labeling one copy: Evidence A. The order gave me clarity. Fear began to look smaller when arranged on paper. By sunset, the ocean wind carried a storm warning again. The air thickened, electric, and I realized how fitting it was. In Florida, storms were never punishment, they were cleansing. I watched the sky turn from silver to violet and thought how sometimes destruction was the only way to rebuild what was stolen. The days that followed blurred together, each one quieter than the last. I spent them sorting through evidence, watching the storm outside fade into pale winter sunlight. Calm looked peaceful from the window, but inside me it was sharpening into purpose. Bianca's latest report arrived in the middle of the afternoon. It came in a sealed envelope delivered by courier, not email. She knew better than to leave a paper trail someone else could intercept. Inside were bank statements, shell company filings, and screenshots of unpaid contractor claims, all tied to Hale Developments. One page stopped my breath. A transfer marked 6 figures from my parents' trust account to Trevor's company, labeled as an investment advance. The signature authorizing it was Sabrina's. It was all there: desperation disguised as strategy, greed written in numbers and ink. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore, it was financial theft wrapped in family language. Every document screamed what she'd tried to hide. The house was her leverage, the only clean collateral she thought she had left. I read the files twice, then placed them neatly on the desk beside Julian's printed deed. Together they looked like two sides of a coin, truth on one, deception on the other. I felt no anger this time, only clarity. The facts had stripped emotion from the story. What remained was evidence, and evidence never lies. Julian called that evening, his tone as calm as always. He said the material Bianca uncovered was enough to initiate a fraud review through the county recorder's office. He also recommended filing a formal civil complaint. The process would be slow, he warned, but solid. His words didn't scare me. Patience had become my weapon. That night, I prepared my statement for submission. I wrote it the way my mother taught me to write thank you notes: deliberate, polite, impossible to misinterpret. I described the fake deed, the forged transaction, the intention to intimidate me into leaving. Every sentence was measured. I wasn't writing to vent, I was documenting history. When I printed the pages, the ink shimmered faintly under the desk lamp. I signed my name once, firm and final. For the first time since the party, my hands didn't shake. I placed the documents in a brown envelope and sealed it with a piece of clear tape. It looked ordinary, unremarkable, just paper and glue, but it contained the weight of truth. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. The parking lot was half empty, washed clean by rain. The air smelled of salt and disinfectant, that sterile mix of ocean and bureaucracy. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed softly above beige walls. I waited in line behind strangers with their own stories, divorces, disputes, inheritance fights. We were all there for closure, each of us trying to reclaim something that had been taken. When my turn came, I handed the clerk my envelope. She stamped it without comment, slid it into a tray, and called the next number. Just like that, the lie began to unravel in a system bigger than any family name. A week later, the story broke. It started as a whisper online, a headline buried under local updates, real estate firm under investigation for fraud allegations. But within 24 hours, it spread like salt water through the cracks of a dock, steady, unstoppable. Bianca's article appeared on every platform, complete with official documents and court filings. The truth no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to anyone willing to read. Hale Developments was finished before the investigation even began. Contractors demanded payment. Investors filed suits. The firm's accounts were frozen. Trevor's signature was printed across every page of the indictment like a confession. And there, in a small paragraph near the bottom, was Sabrina's name listed as a corporate officer, potentially complicit. The news traveled faster than I expected. My phone lit up constantly, messages from relatives, old friends, even neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years. They wrote words like, "I can't believe she'd do that," and "You must feel vindicated." But I didn't feel vindicated, I felt quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after thunder. I watched it all unfold from the small apartment I had rented by the bay. Through the window, gulls floated against the wind, oblivious to everything collapsing on shore. I spent my mornings making coffee, reading headlines, and deleting messages from people who once doubted me. I had no interest in explanations or apologies. The story spoke for itself. Bianca called one evening, her voice low, measured. She said the county's fraud division had confirmed the documents I'd submitted were authentic. The case was officially public record. I thanked her, not because I needed gratitude exchanged, but because truth deserves acknowledgement. Then we hung up, and I let the silence fill the room like a tide coming in slow. 2 days later, a letter arrived. No return address, but I recognized Sabrina's handwriting instantly, neat, symmetrical, the way she'd always signed Christmas cards. Inside was a single page. She wrote that she was sorry, that she'd lost everything, that she didn't know what else to do. She asked if we could meet. I folded the letter once, then again, until it fit into the palm of my hand. I didn't cry. The ink smudged slightly from the pressure of my thumb, and for a moment I imagined her writing it alone, scared, forced to face the reflection she'd been avoiding. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was distance. That night I walked along the shoreline outside my apartment. The sky was heavy with clouds, but the water glowed faintly, catching the reflection of a nearby pier light. I thought about the word family, how fragile it becomes when weighed against greed, how easily love fractures when trust is sold for convenience. My parents had taught us that the house was meant to hold us together. Instead, it revealed who we truly were. Justice didn't look like triumph. It looked like peace, like still water after a long storm. Sabrina had taken the stage once, certain she could rewrite the script. Now, she was watching her own ending, written not by cruelty but by consequence. I went home, placed her letter in a drawer, and closed it without locking it. Forgiveness wasn't part of this story. Closure was. Weeks passed before I saw her again. The air had cooled by then, and the ocean no longer smelled of storms. The courthouse filings had run their course, and the story had moved on to newer scandals. But silence doesn't erase consequence, it only deepens it. I went back to the old house one evening. The for sale sign was still planted in the front yard, leaning slightly as if even the ground had grown tired. The windows were covered in dust, the lawn overgrown. It didn't look like home anymore. It looked like an apology written too late. Sabrina was already there. Her car sat crooked by the curb, a dent on the passenger door, streaked with salt. She stood near the porch, small against the emptiness, clutching something, a folder, maybe, or the remnants of our history. I stopped a few feet away. The distance felt like years. I didn't speak, but I didn't need to. She turned, and for the first time in my life, I saw her without the mask of control. Her eyes were hollow, skin pale beneath the porch light. The same woman who once declared ownership in front of everyone now stood as if waiting for permission to exist. She said nothing, and neither did I. The quiet stretched between us, thick with what used to be love. I watched her mouth tremble, her fingers tighten around the folder, and I knew what was inside: letters, explanations, maybe the deed itself. But redemption doesn't come in paper form. In that moment, I realized something simple. I no longer needed her to understand me. The version of her that could have mattered was gone long ago, traded for greed and desperation. What stood before me was only the echo of that choice. I stepped closer, not to comfort, but to confirm the truth. The woman who had once tried to erase me now looked erased herself. I wondered if she understood that this loneliness, this collapse wasn't punishment from me. It was gravity, the natural consequence of lies too heavy to carry. Without a word, I took the keys from my pocket and placed them on the porch railing. My name was still on the deed, but ownership meant nothing now. The house had become a grave for everything that used to hold value: trust, family, memory. I turned away before she could speak. My footsteps on the gravel sounded final, sharp, deliberate. When I reached the gate, I looked back once, not out of pity, but closure. She was sitting on the steps, the folder open in her lap, pages fluttering in the wind. They looked like the remnants of wings that would never fly again. I walked toward the fading light, feeling nothing but clarity. Revenge hadn't rebuilt me, it had revealed me. There was no joy in her downfall, only peace in my distance. As I reached my car, the first stars appeared above the bay, quiet witnesses to everything we destroy when we choose pride over love. I started the engine, left the street behind, and didn't look back. Months slipped quietly into each other. The chaos that once filled every corner of my life had dissolved into something still, almost gentle. The bay outside my new apartment shimmered in shades of silver each morning, the water calm enough to reflect the sky perfectly. I'd started to learn how to live without looking back. There were no more phone calls, no letters, no reminders of the storm that had broken everything open. The silence that used to feel unbearable had changed shape. It wasn't emptiness anymore, but space. A space to breathe, to rebuild, to remember who I was before my name became evidence. Every morning I walked along the shore, collecting small shells the tide left behind. I never kept them. I only liked the act of noticing, of recognizing that even broken things could return, reshaped, softer than before. Healing, I realized, didn't ask for forgiveness, it only asked for presence. My work found rhythm again. I took on new clients, paid my bills on time, learned to cook simple meals. On weekends I drove down the coast with the windows open, letting the salt air erase the last traces of tension that used to live in my chest. Freedom didn't arrive as a celebration, it arrived as routine, as quiet mornings that didn't need meaning. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, I thought about the house. Not as a wound, but as a story that ended exactly where it was supposed to. Ownership had been a word that once chained me to pain. Now, it was just a line on paper I no longer needed to sign. Sabrina never reached out again, and I never searched for her. That absence was its own closure. What she lost was tangible money, reputation, comfort. What I gained was invisible, but endless. Peace, autonomy, silence that didn't hurt anymore. I learned that revenge isn't about victory, it's about removal. Removing the power they had to define your worth, removing the noise they left behind, removing the idea that love must survive betrayal to be real. Sometimes freedom is subtraction, not addition. On the first day of spring, I stood at the pier watching the horizon blur between sea and sky. The air smelled of new beginnings, sharp, clean, infinite. I didn't think about justice or loss or her. I thought about how light always finds its way back through whatever remains. I closed my eyes, inhaled the wind, and finally felt something simple: peace without permission. If you've ever reached that moment when revenge stops mattering, when freedom isn't about what you've taken back, but what you've let go, tell me below. Tap like, subscribe, and share your story, because healing deserves to be witnessed too.